Hi everyone. Today I wanted to look at database properties. So what are database properties? How can they serve us as developers? What can we do with them, etc.? So let's dive in. As with all my other videos, I have a web page on the subject. Playing with database properties. And in it, I cover how do we list existing properties in the database, how do we retrieve a specific one instead of all of them, how can we create a new one if we want to, and how can we delete a property if we want to. Today's example, it's all built off of the self-healing object variables just because it facilitates coding and it also optimizes code. So if you're not familiar with that, you may want to check out that link first, although the database has everything in it one way or another. And then we get into why do we care about databases and how do we code them. And then I cover an alternative approach or briefly touch upon storing information in the registry. So let's take a look at each one of these one by one quickly and really understand as much as we can about database properties. Why do we care about database properties? How are they useful to us? Well, you see, database properties are things that tell us about how the current database is configured. For instance, as I list here, do you want the status bar at the bottom of your application to be displayed? Do you want the database to compact on close? By the way, this is something you shouldn't want or need. Do you want the shift bypass capability enabled, or would you like to disable it? You'd like to find out the database version. You want to find out things about the navigation pane. All these things are database properties. But beyond that, we have the built-in database properties, but we can also create our own database properties. And this is where it can become useful for developers because you can store whatever information you want. Activation date, installation date. You could store the position of the database when it was last used. That way when it reopens, it goes back to that place. The sky here is really the limit. You can use the database properties to store anything that is of value to you as a developer. Why? Yes, we can most definitely store information in tables, or we could store them in a text file and read that in. There's so many approaches to storing information. But one of the reasons people like database properties is, one, it's attached to the database. It's part of the database. Two, it's obfuscated. It's hidden. Unless you're a developer, you're not going to know that you can actually go and grab a list of properties and have other information stored there, right? But if you have a file or a table, well, yeah, users can come across that and mess around with those. And it doesn't take that much skill to find those, right? So these are the reasons why we're interested in them and how we can use them. Well, that's what we're going to look at next. Let's just take a look briefly at the native properties. So I have a demo database. Let's just open it up here. And I set up an auto exec macro that shows a message box. But I just want to cover briefly, what are the built-in properties? Well, if you go into options, current database, these are a lot of the built-in properties that are available to us. So right now we're going to be talking about using VBA to automate these, but never forget a lot of them are available through the graphical interface, through the GUI. So the compact on close, although we're going to show in a minute how you can control it through VBA, you can just as easily come in this menu and check it or uncheck it. And it has the same effect at the end of the day. You're changing the database property. What we're going to be talking about VBA is probably exactly what's happening behind the scenes of this form. It's going to be changing the exact same property, except this gives you a convenient graphical approach. So let's dive in. Let's look at how can we use VBA to play around with database properties. So the first thing to do here is just to look at the overall setup, and then we'll dive into the code. So the setup is very simple. Like I said, I created an auto exec here just to pop up a message box. We'll see why in a second. And then I have 3 modules. If we come into the DB module, because properties are attached to the current database, instead of always using current database and calling that over and over and over, I've chosen to use a self-healing database object. So that's what this module is for, and that's all it's for. And then the heart of the matter is really contained in the DB properties module. And as you can see here, we control if we're using early or late binding. And then I have my different functions. So let's start off with the most straightforward one is let's see what's currently in the database. Which ones exist natively in a database? Well, it's very simple here. So I create a counter that we're using while we iterate to go get the right property. And then it's very simple. For every single one of the properties in the current database, I'm going to come here, the property, so that one that we're on, I'm going to just extract its name, its type, and its current value. So let's run it. And notice here, you're not going to find, if we come back for a second here, options, current database. And here we had compact on close, right? But if you come back into the VBA, notice here you're not going to find compact on close. There's a disconnect between the labels and the property names, and you have to be aware of that. What you're going to find instead is auto compact is what they called it. And then so the first thing was the name. The second thing was the type. So it's a type 4. We'll look at that in just a second. And then the third element was its value, 0. So 0 is false. So what it's saying is auto compact is false. We don't want it to compact on close. So let's clear that away for 1 second. Let's go back into our options. So we're going to do this manually the first time. We're going to add the compact on close. So we want it now. Okay. Let's do a compact, go back into our database, clear this out, and rerun our function. So now you have the auto compact set to true. And that's what I was trying to highlight here. Not only is this function great because it allows you to quickly see an overview of all the existing properties, but it also enables you to go into the graphical interface, change a value, and then come back and reevaluate to identify what did they call that property. I also have a link on my website that gives certain listings, but this is what I was doing myself to figure some of this out. I'd run a list, put them into, let's say, a notepad, then I'd go change a value, and I'd export it here into the immediate window, and I compare it with my initial text file. And it allowed me to very quickly identify, oh, this is what they called that property. You'll also see there's a complete disconnect here in the formatting used over the years, auto compact with a space, and yet here a lot of them have no spaces in the property names. So just really you have to pay attention here to get the proper name. And why I'm emphasizing this is because next, what we're going to look at is how can I retrieve a specific value? Because realistically, you're not going to be needing to extract a full listing like this very often. What you're really going to be interested in is, does this database have this property set? And that's what you're going to be looking at. You're going to want to see, does it allow full menus or not? Does it allow the shift bypass or not? Does it allow compact on close or not? You're not going to be extracting them all. And to do that, you're going to see it's very similar because we're just going to come here in the get property, and we're just going to come here and we're going to say get which property. So we just have to supply the name, but that's where that list properties is useful because it allows us to get the proper names. So we can use the get property to retrieve any of the different properties we want. So let's clear this out for a second. And let's use the get property. And we're going to print it to the immediate window just to simplify our lives. And it's as simple as that to retrieve a property. We did the auto compact before, and you get one. You can get the version of the current database, 12. So as you can see, it's a very simple function. And if we were to go and get the hello world, you get null. So when they don't exist, I've set here the error handler to catch that and to return null. So that's one way of basically telling you, the property does not exist. It's null. It hasn't been set up. The next one I thought we'd look at was how do we set a property. And this is where we're going to come back to what is the type, because we have to supply a type. And remember up here we saw the types that was exported as part of it. Well, it's the same thing. We come here, and by default, if it already exists, we don't need to worry about the type. All we need to do is say, here's my property, I want to set it to this value. But what happens if we're trying to set a new property, one that doesn't exist? Well, then it's going to cause an error. So on error, it's going to go to the error handler, and it's going to trigger the 3270 error, in which case we're going to create it. And to use the create property, we have to be able to supply the type. And that's why here we supply the type. So when we're creating a new one, we have to supply the type. And the type is very easy. I give some examples here, and I have a link on the page that has the full listing. But basically, as you can see, each type, then each number represents something. DB text, DB currency, DB date. So what the type is telling the database, the property, is what type of data am I holding in this property. And if you take one of these and just do a search in the Object Explorer, you'll see the complete listing here. It's the data type enum, and you'll see the ones. But you're going to notice if you start doing this at all, you're going to be using the same 4 or 5 over and over and over, and most of them, the other ones, you don't really have a need for. But just be aware, you do have a full listing, you have access to all of these. Now that we know that, it really isn't very hard to now do an update. So what I say once again is, let's say we want to now control the auto compact, the compact on close. So what I normally would do if I'm trying to figure out the proper code for this is I'll run my list. And if you come down to the auto compact, remember it's a data type 4. And just out of curiosity, let's come back here. What is data type 4? Well, we just have to slowly go through the list until we find the one that's associated with a value of 4. And there we go, db long. So what it's telling us is the variable we supply to it is type db long, so we have to supply a long value. Okay, so if we take all of this and delete it, we can take the set property command. And what are we setting? Well, we want to do the auto compact. That's the property we want to change. We now know, because we ran the previous sub, that it's of a type 4, and we have to supply a long value. Well, we want to turn it off, let's say. And that's as complicated as it is to change a property value. We press enter, and it returns true or false if it worked or not. And just remember with the auto compact, nothing changes because we're going through VBA. For it to take effect, we have to do a compact and repair. So we perform a compact and repair. And if we come in to our options and come down to compact and repair, it is off. If we come back here and as simply as changing the value to true, a 1, and run it again, perform a compact and repair, now we come back into our options and you'll see compact is enabled. So that's how easy, how hard it is to change a value of a property. Let's take the example of we want to set a demo property 1. And let's say, I have it down here. Let's say we want to enter a date. Well, I know now db date is not a type 8. So we're going to say it's an 8. And here we're just going to say it's a now value. If I run that, and now I come back to my list properties, I will now have demo property 1, type 8, and the date. And well, now date and time, so when we just ran our function. So as you can see, we can use the set to both set existing ones, and it even creates and sets new properties. So that's where it gives us the ability as developers now to create any type of property we want. One word of caution about all of this, with this setting especially, is during testing, you'll see in the list, you've got a whole list here of different nav pane settings, properties. You can try to set them all you want. They don't stick and they won't get reflected in the graphical interface. So let's just say we wanted to close it. Well, that won't work. We want to change the width of the nav pane. Oh, you can set it, and if you reread the value, it says it's been changed, but the reality is nothing changes on the graphical interface. And even if you compact and repair or close the database and reopen, that setting never sticks. So just be aware that there seems to be some disconnect with some of these properties. I think they're the later properties, anything to do with the nav pane for sure. Then there are also a couple, I guess, hidden properties that aren't necessarily there by default, but they are database properties. So you can use the set property, for instance, to add the allow bypass, which I've already done. That's why it shows up here. But natively, when I first create a database, that property doesn't even appear. But you can use it to disable the shift bypass and stop users from being able to bypass your auto exec function, etc. So this is the set property is really useful. And then there was the case of the delete property. Now be careful, you're messing with things here. I highly recommend not deleting any built-in properties. It's just not a good idea to mess with those things. But if you want to delete your own user-defined database properties, by all means. So we can come in here and very easily, with a single line of code, delete property. You just pass it the name of the property you want to delete. And as easy as that, it's been deleted. And if you come back to your list and you rerun it, it is now gone. And that summarizes working with the properties, database properties through VBA. Well, and we also covered how it can be done through the graphical interface for built-in properties. I'll also just show you here one last little tidbit. We talked about database properties. There are several other types of properties in a database, not just the database properties themselves, the current database properties. So I just illustrate here in the demo that there are what's known as project properties, and there are even other ones. But just to illustrate how, if they existed, you could access those, for instance. And this is a sub I created where I was trying to figure out why the nav pane properties weren't working. And I've tried all sorts of things. So I tried changing the nav pane width, and then I tried clearing my current database variable and refreshing it to see if that would help. I tried refreshing the current database properties. I tried refreshing the container. I tried application refresh database window. I tried hiding the nav pane and reinitializing it. I've tried all sorts of variations. It really there just seems to be no way to make the nav pane respond to the change of properties, nor make them stick beyond a close or a compact. FYI, I did reach out to the Microsoft Access development team. I'm waiting to hear back. If they come up with a solution, a workaround, I'll be sure to share and update my article in consequence. Before wrapping things up, I just wanted to touch on the last two things in my article. And I wanted to go over two distinct other approaches that can be used. Now, the first one, we're still talking about database properties. And it's simply that Microsoft has built into it application get option and application set option. So you can use them, as I show here, to retrieve the value and change the value of a property. This doesn't give you the ability to list all of them, but if you know the name, you can go get any individual property you want. And there is no option, that I'm aware of at least, to delete a property. But these can be very useful if all you need to do is read or change a value. Then you don't need necessarily to use custom VBA functions. So depending on your needs, this can be an excellent, very straightforward way of doing it. If you need more power, more flexibility, well then by all means use the VBA code that I supplied. The last element is, I've seen in several cases in forums, I've been asked, how can I do things with the registry? Now, we can get into a big complex module to deal with the registry, and I may do that in another video. But I did want to point out that once again, we do have a couple built-in approaches for this. And mainly, we have the get setting, the save setting, and the delete setting. Now, I'm not getting into all the details, but I just wanted to make you aware, if you don't want to use database properties and you don't want to use tables and external files and things like that, but you still want to have information stored, well then this might be another approach for you to consider using the registry. As with database properties or registry, or even if you're using a table or a text file, if you have sensitive information that you're wanting to store, even if it's an installation date or an activation key, or you're wanting to control the maximum number of users in a database, or whatever the case may be, anything that you deem to be sensitive or important that you don't want users to be able to just plainly see, use encryption. Online you can easily find VBA code to perform encryption. Find a method that works for you and just encrypt the data before you save it to the registry, the properties, a file, a table, and have obviously the appropriate routine to decrypt it so you can use it. And several people actually will encrypt things 2 or even 3 times to try to secure it and avoid prying eyes from being able to reverse engineer the encryption routine. So that pretty much sums it up, guys. And I hope this has helped you out, understand a little bit what database properties are, how you can see what they currently are, how they're set, and how you can work with them, whether change the values, delete them completely, etc. Thank you once again for taking time out of your day to watch this video. Please leave me a comment. I'd love to know if you guys find this useful, anything I can do to improve the videos, future subjects that are of interest to you. If you don't mind, subscribe, give me a thumbs up. If you're able to promote my channel in any way, share it, please do so. Be greatly appreciated. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.